So I think vintage watches are not hyped, to be honest, because there's nothing hype about a vintage watch. Vintage watches are immune to marketing. The marketing was done 30, 40, 50 years ago, if ever, because I don't even know if marketing really existed at that time. So vintage watches, you don't have the hype, and you have some vintage watches that do well at auction, even though the modern house, the modern brand, is actually not very desirable. So in a vintage watch, you really buy the watch, you buy the product, you buy its beauty, you buy the story, and I think that's why vintage watches and independent makers actually have a lot in common, which is you don't have any marketing spiel going on, because the modern guys, they don't have the independents, they don't have the money for the marketing, and the vintage ones, nobody knows about the marketing, if ever there was any marketing, and they all tell the story. They tell the story of the maker, of the person who wore it, of the era the watch was made in. So I think seriously, there's no hype in vintage.
So yeah, we're very happy to have you in Kuwait, to be honest, and I want to get your first impression about Kuwait. How did you see it?
Listen, I arrived last night, but I have to say that for the few hours that I have been welcomed with open arms. I feel like I'm at home. I love it. And once again, I'm coming back because it's everyone's so friendly.
Nice. That's really nice to hear. And you've been to 360 so far.
Yes.
Grand Hayat, staying Grand Hayat, you've been to 360. We're really big on malls in this region.
Yes. Because it's too hot to be walking in the streets, so you have to go to the mall. But it's impressive. 360 it's an impressive architecture. And last night I was walking, and I know that in the region everybody comes out at night, but yesterday it felt incredible, the amount of people walking around the mall.
Oh, it's Friday.
Yes, it was the weekend.
So it's the whole weekend. Yeah, it's busy. It's busy.
No, it's impressive.
And it's really interesting because in Kuwait during the winter gets slower, not slow, but gets much slower, and people start going barbecuing and going to the desert and such. And we do that. I know in Europe you do that in the opposite. In the summer is the barbecue season, and here's the different. So that's really nice to hear. But Alex, honestly, today I want to talk about many things. It's an open conversation. We'll talk, and I wanna ask you, how and when did you get into this auctions, watches in general?
So watches, it's a long story, because actually I've been into watches since I was around 12 years old. When my parents bought me their first Swatch watch that had come out, and it was the coolest thing in the world, and I know everybody in my class had one, and we were trading them, and somebody had a red strap, somebody had a black strap, and it was incredible. But that kind of hooked me. It opened a whole new world. And I don't know if you know, but I wasn't originally in the watch business. I used to be a lawyer before.
Yeah, I know that.
Here, learned something new. So I was a lawyer in Paris actually for about 12 years, and in love with watches. And in the early 2000s, I co-founded a watch discussion forum called The Purists, which is now called Purist Pro. So this is like prehistory. This is like dinosaur times, before social media, anything, blogs existed. And little by little, I started doing some consultancy for brands in terms of digital, how to do digital, client marketing. Because at the time, brands, they were selling only through retailers. So they had no idea who their final client was. So that got me. And at one point, Vacheron Constantin contacted me, and it was a brand I loved. And it was a brand had actually started their own discussion forum. And this was for fun. This was on my weekends and evenings when I was not sleeping. I was still a lawyer. And Vacheron asked me if I would like to go join them, leave Paris, come to Geneva, and set up the digital and CRM. And I said, let me think about it. Yes. A second and a half. And moved to Geneva 15, 16 years ago. And worked at Vacheron for 7.5 years. I've been now at Phillips for 8. So Phillips, it's an interesting story. At one point, I wanted to start my own company and do social media, CRM, etc., for smaller brands, for the independents who don't have the means to have somebody full time. And then at that time, Max Buser calls up Aurel Bax. Max is a good friend of mine. Aurel Bax, who's the head of Phillips watch department, and said, "Listen, there's Alex. He wants to leave. Maybe have a look at him. It could be interesting for your team." And then Aurel called me, and then instead of starting my own business, I went directly into auction business, and I haven't regretted it a single day. I've never worked this hard in my life, but it's worth every day, every second. I mean, I see the most beautiful watches in the world. I get to hold, touch things that people would only dream of, people that would never see. You could only see behind a window. I'm living the dream.
And that's amazing. So you really got into it because of your hobby. Never was a business idea.
Never.
Like, how did you even start the forum back in the days? Like, did you have friends around you that want to discuss,
No, that's the thing. None of my friends liked watches, and I used to want to talk watches to them. And after 5 minutes, they're like, "Okay, enough. This is too boring." It's like talking, I don't know, computers or programming. Like, I don't like this anymore.
Because now when I think about it, if you go 5 years ago, let's say 5 years ago, it would be weird to talk to someone about watches. Like in Kuwait, from my culture, from what I know, so you wouldn't just go to someone, "Hey, yeah, I'm really into watches." You're like, "What do you mean you're into watches? We just buy them, wear them, and that's all, right?" So it was like, that's why you started the forums. You wanted someone to talk to.
Exactly. And at the time, most of the community of watch collectors, at least those who were into going online and talking watches, they were mostly in Singapore and the US.
Yeah. Actually, I want to, again, podcast, we jump. Why Singapore is a big watch community there?
I think Singapore, they're a bit like the Italians were in Europe. The Italians, they like their style, and they started looking at vintage watches in the 70s and the 80s when nobody was looking at these. And the Italians basically launched the watch collecting of vintage. That's where it all started. And I think the Singaporeans, they're a bit like, the Italians of the East.
Of the East, yeah.
And very interestingly, 20 years ago, when nobody was looking at independent watchmaking, 25 years ago, Singapore,
yeah.
Max Buser, Urver, Kari Voutilainen, all these guys, they were all going to Singapore, and everybody, it's the Singaporeans who were buying. So it's incredible.
It's a small country. It's not like a.
You have to ask Mike Tay how that started.
Because even when I was just talking about you about the last podcast we did in English, and it was Ken from Singapore, from Deluxe, and because also his choice in watches, it's really interesting. He has all these fancy Mings and Dibeton, and like in our region, it's difficult to find someone who's really into these independents. Usually we like bigger brands, and then we slowly buy here and there. But in Singapore, he said, no, it's very regular to see someone with the arm is strong.
They rather go for the smaller brands than the bigger brands. But in the region, I think it's really interesting because during COVID, we saw a whole generation of younger collectors come, at least to auction, and they were not buying Pateks or Rolexes. They were buying the independent guys.
They're not buying them because they got too crazy in prices, or you think because they start appreciating these?
I think a lot of the new generation, they don't want what their parents or the older generation is wearing. And the independence, I think it gives them more personality or more individuality because you don't see them on everybody's wrist. And also vintage. I mean, imagine you go see I won't give any brand names, but imagine you have this super hot, expensive, complicated watch from a big brand, and they make maybe a few hundred, a few thousand of them. Yeah, if you want to be individual, you go to a get together, maybe you have 5 or 6 people who have that. But if you were wearing a vintage watch or one of these independents, you're probably the only one. So I think that also played a lot on this new generation.
And actually, if you think about independent watchmaking, they had really difficult days back when you moved from Vacheron to Phillips and Max.
Yeah.
Now they're enjoying. Like, how was it 20 years ago?
Well, 20 years ago, independent watchmaking, even 25 years ago, if you go back, where basically there was no even forums to talk about watches. So independent watchmaking, these guys, they were making maybe a few unique pieces for their good clients, but that doesn't feed you. And then they were developing movements for the big brands, and obviously hush hush, and nobody talked about it. With the arrival of the forums, and at the time there were basically two big forums in the English language. It was Time Zone, which was created by a Singaporean, and then the Purists. So Time Zone was the late 1990s, and the Purists was early 2000s. And little by little, you had people traveling to Basel Fair, taking photos of the independence, etc. I remember Philippe Dufour at the time in 2000, 2001. Everybody's like, oh, wow, what an interesting man, etc. So that really opened up. And then more and more the MBNF and Max, especially with the Opus series that he did at the time with Harry Winston, which helped Vianney Halter, that helped Orvac, etc. So that was a big deal. I remember every year we're just waiting for Basel Fair to see what new, cool, extraordinary watch was coming out. So nobody was blasé. Today I feel people are a bit more blasé. And then around 2000 and when was it, 10, 12, Instagram, Facebook, etc., and that just blew. And today I think it's probably much easier for an independent watchmaker because you don't, even if you don't have a marketing budget, which they don't, just go on Instagram, you're fine. And I think it's become easier, and that's why you see a generation of watchmakers who are actually very young, who are in their mid-20s, early 30s. Before, the independent guys, they were like 45, 50, just starting their own business because, they were making watches for others, they were creating a reputation, etc. And little by little. Now you have guys coming out of school, creating their brands and having a waiting list.
Yeah. That's actually, because we lived this period. How you mentioned some names for Muhammad that, this is just a single guy, either in Switzerland or in Paris. He had like 3 different models, and they're already sold out, and they're like in a not crazy amount of money, but I know the effort they put in it. It's just too expensive for us. But also, and you mentioned something very interesting too. You said you went to Vacheron to work on marketing and CRM.
Digital
and CRM. And now we live in an era that you get in touch directly with the manufacturer. Back in the days, the only person you know is the salesman.
Yeah, exactly.
Here in the company, or let's say like Fin Bahbahani or some other company in Sadiqi. So Sadiqi would be the only contact you have with Patek, and then Sadiqi back to Patek. But now we see, I don't know if it's good or not. In the past 5 years, brands went really hard on going direct to customers. So what is your take on that? So we have bigger brands like, I don't think Patek that did that much, but like AP, really focusing on AP houses and apartments and lounges.
I think there's two, and I don't know if it's good or bad that you should ask this to the brands themselves to see why and what advantages they have. But if you look at like two huge brands, collectible brands like Patek and Rolex, I think they have one shop, and it's a tiny little shop in Geneva. And then they have Boucherer, which is their biggest retailer, which is across the street, that has more Rolexes than in their own shop. And then Patek has 3 salons in the world. The rest is they go through retailers. I think a lot of brands decided to go individual and create their own boutiques, and you see mostly in Richemont or the Swatch Group, they have their own boutiques. One, it helps them probably
save the margins.
Double margin.
True.
But also, I think it helps them control who they're selling to and how they're selling the watch. Because they're mono brands, the salesperson really knows the brand. It's not like these big retailers where you have 6, 7, 10, 12 brands and you can't expect the salesperson. So I think it's also a question of controlling the image, controlling the narrative, and actually knowing who your clients are.
Because the cutoff was a bit because I remember during COVID and such, Richmond was one big group that wanted, I wanted direct boutique in Kuwait. Here they're not yet, but like in Dubai, they pulled out. Swatch did the same. And then was a cutoff for the old collectors.
Yeah,
If I'm buying from Bahbahani and Siddiqui for 10 years now, I'm just like a new customer to them.
exactly.
So this was also a bit messy. And when I think about that, I also think about other brands. Like, you know what MBNF did, Max? I love this guy in general. He knows that we've been with him a lot, and we just did a podcast with him, which I will listen soon. The Mad Watch they did, I felt is the same idea of, you know what, I'm going to go directly to my customers. I'm going to have a much bigger customer base compared to what I can do with MBNF. And it's all the communication is very friendly and personal, you know?
I think, well, Max, I think he cut down a lot of retailers, and now he's selling mostly directly anyway, and for sometimes through his Mad galleries. But I think what was really interesting and intelligent on what he did with the Mad watches was, it was like a thank you to his clients, because the watches are very affordable. I think it's like 1,500 francs, the first ones, and from up to 2,000, something like that. So for a lot of people, 2,000 or 3,000 francs is a lot of money, but for watch collectors, it's let's say it's still affordable. And so he allowed his, what he calls the tribe, the existing clients, to get something super cool, fun, and for those who like his designs but could not afford, I mean, his entry level is very high. I think we're close to 100,000 Swiss francs, $100,000, to get access to the name, the design, the vibe at a much affordable price. And you have very big collectors. I mean, collectors who could buy a Mad watch every hour, basically, and still have the money. And they're wearing it, and it's fun, and it's cool. So it's. I think it was more like a thank you sort of thing than let me get to know who my clients are.
I remember it was, I think, Geneva Watch Days, right?
It was, I think, 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I still remember every single one wearing the blue was the first?
It was, the blue one was the first, and everybody was like shaking it, and he had the rotor going around. It was fantastic, yeah.
I guess you have the blue then?
I have the blue, but I gave it to my son. I gave one to my son, and then I had the red, so each of my sons have a Mad.
Nice,
yeah.
nice. I have the red one also. All of the red one. But they keep doing it. The new one is fun.
The new slim one is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, every time we find another excuse to find
slim. Exactly.
And like, okay, so let's say you got into Phillips now. And how like in Phillips, just went to watches. And what was the first thing you managed? Like, was it an auction, or what did you do at the beginnings?
So I joined Phillips as a watch specialist. So basically my job, and this is something was very new to me, is to get watches in. First of all, I had to all of a sudden, I liked watches. I loved watches. I knew watches. But all of a sudden, you had to figure out every reference number in Rolex. You need to know every reference number in Patek, in this. And from 1940 to 2015. So my job was first to actually get the watches, describe them, do the research, etc. for the catalogs, and little by little develop a client base, understand how to evaluate a watch, because especially in vintage watches, everything is about the condition of the watch. You can have a watch that is, I would say, a 5 out of 10 and it's worth 1,000. A watch which is an 8 out of 10, it's worth 100,000, and a watch which is a 9 out of 10 is 300,000. So you have to kind of figure out and understand how condition works, the dial, the case, the way the hallmarks are stamped, etc. So it was a huge learning curve. I joined, it was in May, my first sale was May 2016. And little by little grew and learned. And listen, I was surrounded by the best of the best, so I learned fast.
The thing is, like, how do you even do the research? Because if you look into different things, let's say not all brands keep track of everything they do. Some brands are really good, like Patek, and you can easily send them a watch. They give you an archive.
Yeah.
Omega, they don't do that.
No.
Recently, they just did, right? But if you look at the 80s and 70s, or back in 2015, 16, it would be really hard to do all this research. So it's like...
So the research is, well, that's one good thing is when you're an old timer like myself, you remember what came out when. Exactly.
So you have to have really good memory then.
You have to be obsessed like I am.
Yeah.
There's that, but no, I mean, the big brands, they've always had archives, may it be Patek, Vacheron, Audemars, Omega, Longines, etc. The only one which is a bit complicated is always Rolex because they never want to communicate. So there you have to really know exactly what you're looking at. And you're never alone. I mean, you have other specialists who are more interested in such and such brand or whatever, and you speak to them. And sometimes, we actually reach out to our collectors who've been collecting sometimes the same model for 20 years, and they know 100 times more than you do. And it's okay. You call them up. Listen, I have this piece. What do you think? Is it correct? Are the numbers good? Is the dial correct, etc.? And they help you out. Yeah. So you're never alone. It's not like one of these.
But how can I like, especially if we talk about vintage watches? I'm not into vintage at all, but because of,
Let's hope that changes.
inshallah. Why not? I love a lot of things that vintage big part of the vintage thing, but also for our region, it's really hard to go around and see other things. So when I go to Dubai and there's an expo from your auction house or somewhere else, I usually go and check. I want to see the watches. I read a lot about them. But in vintage, especially for, I'm not going to say younger generation, like my generation, it's tricky. I'm not sure if it's a correct watch, if the dial is not changed. It's like, how can I make sure? Not like, I know buying from a big auction house, that's the first guarantee. And we had this discussion before on this podcast, is that a person we had before, I guess he said, I would buy 50% extra on either, he wasn't talking about watches also, he was talking about other stuff from Phillips, just to have
the peace
the
of mind.
invoice. Yeah, the peace of mind that I bought something. But like, what do I look into watches before buying a vintage? What is the no's or yes?
I think if you really want to go into vintage, first you have to do a lot of homework. Read the books, read the auction catalogs from all auction houses, and I think we try to do a good job at Phillips by explaining why something is good or bad in the catalog. Sometimes there's a lot of text, but it's worth reading it. Is because you learn why. You have to go see as much as you can. For the moment, it's true that most of the exhibitions go to Dubai and they don't come through Kuwait, but hopefully soon. But please go do your research. And the most important is buy from a reputable source. Buy from an auction house. Buy from a very well-known dealer, because these people, first of all, they have done the homework. They have done the research. And if it's come to the market, it's because it's good. I mean, at Phillips, a watch is seen at least by 3, 4, 5 people before it comes to our catalog. We even show it to our watchmaker to make sure that even the movement, etc., is correct. So, sure, pay a bit more, but it's good for your peace of mind, because if anything's wrong, you can always bring the watch back and you will get your money back, rather than say, oh, this is cheap, this is cool, and then. So yeah, it's buy from, it's like everything. You have to go buy from a reputable source. You can't be a specialist in absolutely everything.
So buy the seller, basically. That's what
we always say. Buy the seller, not the watch.
Yeah. So okay, let's get your opinion on something then. What is the most hyped vintage watches, in your opinion?
So I think vintage watches are not hyped, to be honest, because there's nothing hype about a vintage watch. Vintage watches are immune to marketing. The marketing was done 30, 40, 50 years ago, if ever, because I don't even know if marketing really existed at that time. So vintage watches, you don't have the hype, and you have some vintage watches that do well at auction, even though the modern house, the modern brand, is actually not very desirable. So in a vintage watch, you really buy the watch. You buy the product, you buy its beauty, you buy the story. And I think that's why vintage watches and independent makers actually have a lot in common, which is you don't have any marketing spiel going on, because the modern guys, they don't have the independents, they don't have the money for the marketing, and the vintage ones, nobody knows about the marketing, if ever there was any marketing, and they all tell the story. They tell the story of the maker, of the person who wore it, the era the watch was made in. So I think seriously there's no hype in vintage.
Vintage. Okay, underrated then. What underrated watch do you think from the vintage?
I
Things
think
that you see, anything still underrated?
I think, well, obviously vintage watches, what sells well are the big brands, Patek, Vacheron, Audemars, etc. But I think you have some phenomenal, beautiful watches from Longines. The chronographs, the 13ZN movements are exceptional. Omega, Movado, Minerva. I mean, there's some extraordinary watches, and then even some watches from the 70s, 80s, from like Piaget, with a tiger eye and shapes and things. No, I think that there's a lot of in vintage. You can really have fun at relatively very affordable prices.
And in the past 2 years, I've been noticing a lot of the term of neo vintage.
Yes.
Yeah. So what can you explain that to us?
So neo
people-
vintage is interesting because at Phillips we actually have a sale dedicated. We call it Reloaded to the neo vintage, which is the period of 1980 to 1999, which is basically the revival of mechanical watchmaking after the quartz crisis came and slapped around all the brands and who didn't know what they were doing. So neo vintage are watches that were made basically between 40 and 30 years ago. Before when the existence of the big groups, before watchmaking became a bit more industrialized, where it was still half I would say an artisanal or a semi-industrial business. And it's very interesting because while doing research for our sale, you saw that basically the watchmaking industry had to innovate or disappear. And they innovated. And that's where you see the first wristwatch tourbillons. That's where you see the first multi-complication watches. That's the time you see the first perpetual calendars. You see the new movements. And going back to independence, a lot of the innovation was coming from independence. Some names that today are less big, like Vincent Calabrese. The guy was inventing these crazy stuff. Sven Anderson. Frank Mueller, today we look at it as a kind of a fashion brand or not. Frank Mueller was incredible. The watchmaker himself, in 1982, I mean, every year he was bringing out something different. Perpetual calendar tourbillon, minute repeater chronograph world time. The guy was a genius, and then he became a brand, etc. And this is in 1983, where nobody was doing this kind of thing. And then you had Daniel Roth. He brought back Breguet. You see
Roger Dubuis did.
Roger Dubuis,
Amazing.
Parmigian, Blancpain. Today, Blancpain is basically all about the 50 fathoms. But at the time when Jean-Claude Biver took over, they were the first ones to make a perpetual calendar minute repeater. They were the first ones to have a split seconds perpetual calendar. This is in the 80s. Things that today we take for granted, these guys were inventing. So the neo vintage era, incredible period. You can have fun with it. There's still good, very affordable prices.
Yeah. I want to ask about prices. They didn't go crazy. Like,
Depends what. I mean, if you take a perpetual calendar minute repeater 3974 from Patek, platinum one costs $1 million. So it's not affordable. But then you can have a very cool Blancpain. You can have an Ebel. You can have a Breguet tourbillon for not that much. And it's, Daniel Roth was behind those watches. So imagine. No, you can have a lot of fun in watchmaking. You can have a lot of fun.
and you said 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
This period. And if you move to 2024 now, a lot of the names that you mentioned got back.
Yeah.
So LVMH just got Daniel Roth back as a separate brand. So let's talk about independence, because I think the last thing, the seminar you had or the talk you had in Geneva Watch Days, you were wearing an independent watch, right?
Yes.
What watch were you wearing?
Good eye, Ali. It was a Théo Offray tourbillon, and you know, I like independent watchmaking, and it really my very first nice watch that I bought with my first salary was a Daniel Roth in the mid 1990s. I bought it secondhand because I didn't have the money to buy a brand new one, and I remember it was a stainless steel with the pink salmon dial. So Theo Offray, he's a young French watchmaker, and you can really see it in his designs. I believe he's the one who won the Journe Young Talent, Watchmaking Talent, a few years ago.
Yeah, I think so.
And he created this tourbillon as his first watch, fully handmade, very French in its design, meaning it doesn't have the finish and the waves, the shapes, etc., that you often find in Swiss watchmaking.
It reminds me of Breguet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is very Breguet, and Breguet had, and the
French guy.
he's a French guy. He was Swiss, but he lived in France. And actually, Offray, he worked with a guy called Viau, who's a phenomenal watchmaker. He used to restore old Breguet watches. So there is this kind of the French touch, I would say. And you can kind of find it also with a guy called Rémi Couls, who's also a new French. Is this a kind of a new wave of French watchmaking who's coming, which is quite interesting to see.
And then when you say French, they're French and based in France, right?
Yes. Yeah. You know what? France was actually a huge market and for watches. I mean, all the big watchmakers, I'm talking about 200 years ago, 150 years ago, were either French or English. And then the Swiss came with cheaper watches and they wiped out the French and English market. And now all of a sudden it's all about Swiss. Yeah.
Because we do, and when you talk to someone who's really not that big into watches, Swiss made still has a big influence on them. But the reality is, when you look at other watches, it's just amazing.
I mean,
it opens up a lot.
But today, Lange, they're German. There's phenomenal watches. You go to Japan, you have some of the greatest. I mean, Seiko is phenomenal. Grand Seiko, Credor, and then you have all the independents like Azoak.
Yeah, let's
Hajime Azaoka. Okay, excuse me. And then you go to China. Look at bare hands. It's very modern, but the innovation is crazy. And then you have a more traditional, like, and I'm going to destroy his name. So who brought this called the Pastoral, all handmade, phenomenal pieces. So I think you have great watchmakers everywhere, but Switzerland, it's a name. The Swiss made is like a brand of its own, which adds quality to the watch.
And you know, the funny thing is, like, I appreciate Japanese, German, and such. And I had a discussion once with someone. I said, you know what? It's actually easier to do it in Swiss nowadays because you have all these vendors
and everything's there.
Yeah.
The case maker, the dial maker, the hand maker, the gear maker, where everything's around.
So to do it in Japan it's much harder than doing it in Switzerland.
Exactly.
To do it in France or in England and such.
Yeah.
So it's really different. And then who else? Let's talk about independent watchmaking, because I really appreciate these. I think, and as you said, sometimes the bigger guys get lazier, and then you have these who really work hard now. And I believe they're not working as hard as they used to do.
The independents or the big guys?
No, the independents. Like when you go to Philippe Dufour, who's like, let's say, the top of the line. Let's say if you take independence, you have Philippe Dufour. And if you look at his story and how he used to go to Japan, like just trying to sell few pieces a year. Now he's very comfortable in his Lexus going, you know. So it changed a lot. Social media is a huge influence. Also auctions, I think, it's a huge influence because. And there was a joke, a meme I saw, made me laugh, about independent asking for 75% deposit on a 3 years delivery.
I saw that.
So it changed a lot.
Yeah.
And it's easier for them to go direct to customers. It's easy. I think it's also easier for them to participate in expos now.
Well, I think it's different. I mean, you should also remember where they come from. I remember the reason why at Phillips and we're really pushing independence is because I actually do love the independence. And before you had a catalog, and then independent was between a Rolex and a Lange or whatever, and nobody really cared because it was out of context. And then we said, okay, let's try to explain what these guys do. We did exhibitions, we did a book, we did a dedicated section, and little by little, it started growing. But then you have independence and independence. You have people who actually have talent, who bring something on the table. And then you have guys who just, make 3 watches, they're going to sell them, and then they're going to disappear and go do something else. So I think the category of independence is super wide, and you have old timers who really, suffered because nobody was talking about them. You have younger guys who get a lot of coverage because, social media, etc. You have the talented, you have the less talented, but it's like everything. And it kind of reminds me of around 2006, 7, 8, where you had a lot of brands doing, funky designs. And then the crisis came, 2008, and a lot of them, and I think with the independent watchmakers, this is going to happen too. There's going to be a natural selection of those. I'm not saying those that are going to disappear, they deserve to disappear, but those who will remain, those are those who bring something different to the table. There's something that, when you look at their watch, there is real personality.
Mm-hmm. And do you think is for the independents, do you think what they're doing right now is more traditional? Or like if you go back to Urwix and MB&X,
Yes.
back in the days, Debatones, and then you have with the oppuses.
Yeah.
They weren't traditional. None of them did
No.
focused on finishing. None of them focused on a lot of them focused on complications.
Yeah.
But the majority, if you look at the opposites, they're just crazy design, they're very different.
Yeah, but it's funny because it's a question I asked Felix from Oorwerk. I'm like, you guys, the Bethune, Max, etc. You guys were the Vianney Halter. You guys were the creative, independent creative horology. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you guys were the young guys. Today, you're the old guys. But where's the next generation? And it's true that I think collectors now are really more into round traditional watches. Look at Recep Recepi, who's probably the hottest independent watchmaker today. He started his brand around 12, 13 years ago, and he made his AK case, which is kind of like, tonneau, round. It has a very modern look to it. He was not selling anything. He was not selling a single watch, or he was, but it was very difficult. He comes out with his round chronomètre contemporain, and it becomes an instant hit. I think also the collectors, maybe there's this new generation of collectors who is not yet 100% sure of their taste. I wouldn't say not sure of their taste, but you always go to the crazy stuff once you've already had all the traditional stuff. And I think there's this new generation who has come to the market who's still on the traditional level. And maybe in 5, 6, 7, 10 years, we'll go back. But it's like everything. You always want something that doesn't exist. At the time when the Maxes and the Vianney Halters, etc. came, everybody was making 33, 35 millimeter round watches, and these guys came. And then when these guys became big, everybody started wanting, sports watches. And now that sports watches are past, everybody wants more classical round watches. And it will come. It will come. But I think it's just, today we have too much, in my opinion, and I love independence, 3-hand watches with beautiful finished movements. At one point, it's let's see more.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree, especially for the prices they're asking for.
The prices, I think everything is debatable. I think for me, an expensive 3-hand from a big brand is more problematic because the movements have been around for a long time. The cases have been, just because you have a dial change doesn't mean. Whereas an independent, he'll even the bracelet, the strap, he's going to have to buy it for more than what a bigger brand. A lot of it will be handwork that he has to do by himself. So prices, I don't know. I really don't know what the cost of these guys are. Sometimes I do feel that it's too expensive for what it is, some of them. But in general, it's I think I understand more the pricing of the independents sometimes than the very big brands who charge very high prices for things which you're like, not sure of that one.
Yeah. And do you think price matters if the gray market price is much higher? You know, the reason why I'm asking you this is it's easier for me to spend, and we said that it's easier for me to spend 75 on a 5990, $70,000 on a 5990, since it's an old movement, nothing new about it. It's a steel watch, because I know deep inside it's worth 150. So do you think that still it makes a big decision when it comes to collector?
I think it's
easier to justify.
You know what? This is a very new phenomenon, which comes after the post-COVID, where everything was selling for before. And I'll split my answer in two. Before, people were like, I don't care. It's a watch I like. I buy it, and everybody knew that you walk out of the store, you've already lost 20%, and people were happy with it. But today also, the prices of everything has gone so high that, I remember when I started collecting watches, you had to have a nice salary, but you could. Today, I couldn't afford half the watches I bought because just the prices have gone through the roof. And I can understand that, people think about the resale, because if you're spending $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, which is a lot of money in a watch, and you lose 50%, you're losing 40,000. So it's you feel the heat. Whereas you buy a watch at 15,000 and you lose 30%. It's okay. The 5,000 that you lost, it's the price of the having enjoyed the watch for a few years. So I think it today it does have an effect because of the prices that have gone so high.
I really wish that days would come back. I want people to just buy a watch, enjoy it, and then take the hit and just because we take a hit in everything we do. We travel and spend thousands, and we get back. It's an experience,
Exactly.
But with a watch, they wouldn't lose. They don't want to lose anything.
No, but I think people are very badly. They have a bad habit since COVID, post-COVID, and basically it was just 2 years. It was 2021, 2022, where everything went crazy. But I think people are still stuck in that period. A lot of people are, and I think little by little we will come back to a more normal vision of what the market should be.
Okay, I want to get back to you then. So you said. You mentioned something about taste, which is to collectors. When I sit with collectors, I know tastes change over time. So how did it change for you? Like the taste in collecting watches, what you like now compared to what you like 5 years and 10 years ago?
So I think my taste, I started off on very classical things, I think. Well, other than the Daniel Roth, but I was always inspired, or I loved Guilloche Dals. Breguet was huge for me, and I loved Breguet. I remember I had the catalog. Every night I was reading the catalog, and because it was paper at the time. Shows you how old I am. And then I went into the really crazy funky things. And then I came back to more traditional and to funky. But I think my tastes actually haven't really changed, which is either shows that I'm sure about my taste, or that I'm totally stupid because I don't look at anything else. But it's always been vintage and independence. And in this vintage and independence, things have changed, things have not changed. I remember I had no problems wearing a 30 millimeter watch. I think today, and I thought it would look cool, but maybe today I'm just bigger, so it just even looks smaller on my wrist. I think that's something I will probably not go back to. But no, I think I've always had this kind of a little round a circle, and I used to go through here or there in terms of taste. So my taste hasn't really changed.
Because if you look at the market right now, like weirdly shaped watches, it's really hot nowadays, right?
So the market, I think what's really interesting is we're no longer the collectors, and this is the new generation of collectors that have just come to the market in the past 4 or 5 years. It's no longer a market driven by brand. It's a market driven by models. And just because it's a Patek Philippe doesn't mean all Patek Philippe watches are going to do well. And just because it's a brand X doesn't mean all their watches are going to do poorly. So obviously Patek and Rolex are the big brands. But then you look at Cartier, a few years ago, watch collectors, the real heavy hit, they wouldn't look at Cartier. the Crash today is probably the hottest watch in the market. The Tanks, all the older design watch, they're super hot. And so collectors are looking more and more, and this goes back to what we were saying originally about the individuality, is they want things that are different. They want things that are quirky. They're things that you can't find easily. The things that don't come to the market all the time. So there's a rarity factor. So that's what's today that sells, which is good because the market has become really wide. Before, it was always the same things. Now today, everything changes. Piaget, some of the watches that are so much in demand are the Piaget, like for example, the Andy Warhol, which is this really big kind of TV screen watch. 5 years ago, nobody cared about it. So it's really interesting. We've really moved out of this whole brand domination to a more of the search for specific iconic pieces in the brands, regardless of the brand.
And do you feel brands nowadays pay that much attention to us and what we like, what we do?
I think brands still are trying to figure out what the clients want. The reason being, a lot of it, the designs, etc., are worked on a few years in advance. So, a lot of watches that we will see in 2025 are watches that started being designed in 2022 or 2023 because the process of making it. So I think they pay attention, but sometimes the process takes so long that when the watch comes to the market, well, already the train has passed. But yes, I think brands have to pay attention to what their clients want because if not, they won't be selling it. But then you should watch out to what kind of client you're listening to, because you can have 100 clients in the room, you'll have 100 different answers to your questions.
Sure. Because you mentioned Cartier, and to me, I think they're really doing well with the Privé.
Yeah.
So shape got hyped, then they get the asymmetric and such. They did really well. And then suddenly we see on auctions that nobody really wanted any monopusher from Cartier. Nobody cares, and you get it at a really good discount back in the day.
Yeah.
They got hot suddenly, and then Cartier would come and do a re-edition, a very nice size, platinum. And to me, again, I don't want to talk a lot about prices, but when you look at, okay, it's a Cartier monopusher, why am I spending $80,000 on it?
So this is their new monopusher, which is actually a very nice movement. But if you look at the original monopusher, that movement comes from the greatest minds in watchmaking. It was designed by François Paul Journe, Denis Flageolet, Werner Halter, and Felix Baumgartner, and his friend Thomas. I mean, this is like, imagine you have the best chefs in the world who make one dish for you, or you have Ferrari and McLaren and Lamborghini and Pagani make a car all together. It's something that you'll never see again. So and actually that watch, it's all the watch nerds who made it was so big, because they're like, that's
true. No, social media, man, like it's again, one of my best friend that I really like, and he's into watches, but from far away. One nice Navi timer and then one nice Rolex and such. He would just call me and tell me, Ali, why don't you do similar to what the guys are doing on TikTok? And I was like, what the guys are doing on TikTok? And one of them is Mike Nova.
Yeah.
Like what Mike is doing it's amazing for the guys who, like, to me, I don't watch it. I get, it's just too fast, what are you guys doing? But these guys are creating a huge trend outside the watch community.
Yeah.
That is, to me, I think they're moving a lot of brands.
They are, and they're really looking at design. It's very design oriented. It's a lot about the quality as well. But you know what? I think in today's world, whatever can get the word out about how cool watches are and how cool watchmaking is. I think it's important, because let's face it, and we've been saying this for years. Nobody needs a watch. You have your iPhone, your smartphone, so we don't name brands. You go to home, you have your oven. Nobody needs a thing. So either watches die and become like typewriters or mechanical cameras or pens, or you find a way to attract a new generation. And thank God. And this I mean, look at you. You're a young guy, and you have your business, and you have your podcast, and you're on social media, And that's great because, the new generation want to see people like you, not people like me. So that we need them.
Definitely, I want to sit with people like you to learn a lot because, and I always say, one of the things that I really like, and I do a lot of gatherings and go around and talk about it. I love hearing stories from people who experience the stories. Not like we tell you the story, like in Timekeeper, we're a bit good in telling you, what happened during the crisis and the Sempre Gay, blah blah blah. But when you go and sit with a collector from like 30 years ago, he would tell you, yeah, I remember Gerard Genta sitting in Basel, nobody next to him.
Yeah.
But that story to me is worth 1,000, much more important than the story that I would tell about Gerard Genta and what happened to him. So that's why, to me, honestly, it's really good to sit. I go around and ask a lot of questions because, and you had the reason why we're sitting here, that's why Phillips or whatever. It's like you guys experience these periods, what happens, ups and downs, and so your opinion is much more important than us, than the new generation. And when I see these, and again, because maybe our generation, not even the new generation, I'm not part of like most of what they do. I cannot do that. They're too fast. What they do is they just killed all the media, like the bigger media. Not us. I mean, like bigger media. Like you don't care about bigger magazines anymore.
No.
You just follow one single guy who travels and he gets invited, because back in the days nobody would invite us, no matter how big you are. Brands don't care. He gets invited and he does one single video, 1 minute, and you know everything about Cartier.
Yeah.
And then comes another guy, a lot of things about vintage, and you wrote hundreds of articles about it.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think but that's good. But it's really interesting. You're talking about the guys getting interested by invited by the brands. 2002, 2003, on the Purists. So I go to SIHH, which is now Watches and Wonders. And I go to a big brand to attend the press conference. And the PR person is like, who are you? Like, oh, yeah, we run a watch discussion forum. They kicked us out. Like, we don't want these internet people here. You guys are selling fake watches. We're not selling anything. Get out. We got kicked out.
It was honestly the same for us 5 years ago.
Really?
Like the first Watches and Wonder we had, we also lacked experience. So the first Watches and Wonders we had, we didn't do much because we didn't really thought about having all these appointments, and they didn't because we were only another thing. They didn't really respect Timekeeper because we were an Instagram account. We weren't like a licensed magazines and you send invoices and you get paid, bunch of guys that has a camera, and we're the cameraman. We're the, bigger magazine would come editor, and then the guy who writes, and they have, okay, I'm done. Let the photographer do. No, it's just me, man.
It wasn't serious. There was not enough people. You were doing everything yourself. Yeah,
but it changed very quickly. So yeah,
I know that. It's good. Thank God it changes. But once again, every outlet is good to get people interested in this amazing hobby of ours.
Amazing. Let's talk about the market a little bit, and then I want to talk about what do you think that's coming, what's big thing Phillips is working on, and the future of the market. So you mentioned COVID taught us really bad habits of crazy prices. Everything is hot in demand. Watches just keep doing lots of editions and lots of new watches. And you mentioned something before we record, and I want you to repeat if you don't mind, is that not all brands should do hundreds of watches each year, right?
Yeah. So I think the market is good. We hear a lot of things are horrible, there's doom and gloom, etc. But I'm only talking about the secondary market because I don't know the primary market. I don't know what retailers are going through, etc. But I think COVID, or 2021, 2022, the post-COVID years, it was, watchmaking, watch collecting is a new hobby. It's basically started in the 1980s, wristwatch collecting. So I consider what happened, what we saw during the COVID years, is a bit like the adolescence of watch collecting. Teenagers, they're stupid. You don't understand what the hell they're saying or what's going on in their head. Basically, somebody presses the button, the everything goes off, and then they grow up, and then you press the button again, and they've turned into magnificent young adults. And I think this is what happened in the watch collecting world, where I had no idea. Nothing was really making sense. Now it's more rational. Now it's a healthy market. A market is healthy if it makes sense, if prices make sense, if the brands that are being sold or bought are making sense, etc. But if you look at it today in 2024, obviously the market is much higher than 2020, but we're also higher than 2023 and a lot of things. So the market is slowly continuing growing because you have a whole bunch of a new generation coming to the market. But a lot of sellers are still stuck in the 2021 period, but they have to get over it. Some watches that were selling for 5, 6, 10 times retail were going up in price 50% every year. Why? I mean, there's no reason. There's thousands of these were made. It was just pure hype. So, get over it. Let's go back to a more normal and rational way of thinking. And then we're talking about, the lack of innovation or of a lot of big brands. And what I was saying is like, you can't innovate. You can't wow somebody every year because it's just not possible. How many times are we going to reinvent the wheel? But also, and I'm not a retailer, so I can't really comment on it, but maybe you don't need to bring out so many new watches every year. You see all these new watches that are introduced and Watches and Wonders and only hit the markets, the shops, a year and a half or 2 years later. Well, don't introduce them. Introduce them later. And I think, we keep feeding new, it goes too fast. All of a sudden, you see something new, and last year's watches haven't even arrived yet. And last year's watches, well, they look, passé because you want the new one. So just, we don't need to have 30 new watches per brand every year.
I definitely agree. And that's actually one of the good things about the more traditional watches. And we talk about that a lot, about Rolex, about Patek and such. When you wear a 15-year-old Submariner, you don't feel it's old, It's exactly it's the same sub. When you wear a Calatrava, you feel still new and fresh.
Rolex is a phenomenal brand, and I think they're very apart from the rest of the watch brands because basically their designs, other than a few specific, the GMT has been around for 60 years. The Submariner has been around for 70 years. The Daytona has been around for another 70 years, 60 years. So, and they're little tweaks. I mean, the sub from this year and from 10 years ago, it's not the one. You have a ceramic bezel, the movement is different, etc. But it's more or less the same design. There's a continuity. It's like a Porsche 911. It's the same. It's the same and it's not the same. But people feel comfortable seeing it because it's there. It's grounded.
So if they do a model, they keep it for 5-6 years. So it grows up and it grows on you.
Exactly.
And you see it's beautiful, and it just keeps doing that.
But then if there's another brand who does that, I don't know if it could be that successful. I think Rolex, they're really apart in the watchmaking world.
Whenever we talk about Rolex is the best, the most real, that gets views and such.
Really? Wait, I'll tell you one thing. I'm not a big Rolex fan, in terms of whatever. It's not. But every time somebody asks me, they're like, "What's the best watch brand in the world?" I'm like, Rolex. Like, what? You're saying that? I'm like, yeah. The designs are classic. They're timeless. The movements are phenomenal. I mean, you can not service your Rolex for 20 years and it'll continue working. If you want one watch, that's the way to go.
But again, yet it's simple. There are so many different, like if you go into that's again vintage, like if you just take the Daytona, it's crazy how many references and people know, and there's names, nicknames,
exactly,
dials, floating, pH. That's why it gets like you see exactly the same Daytona. This is like 100 and this is 20. So this is the same year also, but no, this one is actually a porcelain. They did a testing. It has its own old culture.
Rolex, I think it started in the 80s where the CEO, Heinegger at the time, said, we're no longer a watch brand, we're a luxury brand. And that's why they sell. I mean, look at Rolex. How many brands do you know that make over 1 million watches a year. So it's not rare. The entry level is, I would say, affordable. It's like $5,000-$6,000. You can get a Rolex. And it's the watch that the student with his first pay will get a Rolex. The CEO will wear a Rolex. The waiter in a restaurant will have a Rolex. The doctor will have a Rolex. And it does not have an effect on the value, because nobody will say, oh, I'm too snobby. I don't want, my doorman to wear a Rolex. I want to wear something so exclusive. And it works. It works. It is incredible. No other brand could do that.
That's very, very true. I think, so the last question would be also around Rolex. So what is the big thing coming for Phillips?
For Phillips, so I told you we have in November, on 8th of November, we have an auction dedicated to the neo vintage, which we call Reloaded, the rebirth of mechanical watchmaking with 65 watches. And we have, for example, Jean's very first tourbillon wristwatch that he sold, fully handmade. Jean made 4 wristwatches in his life, handmade. And this is one of the 4. The very first one he made, he kept it for himself.
Yeah.
So it's in his, this is the first one he ever sold in 1993, fully handmade. We have a unique Philippe Dufour duality. We have the very first Rolex Rainbow. The Rainbow was launched in 2012, officially. This is a unique piece from 1994 that was made for the region, actually, for a client in the region. And Rolex made it and never made another one for almost 20 years. So it is like the benchmark, or what then pushed Rolex to create the Rainbow. It's incredible. And then we have the regular sale over the weekend, which is more the various owners with some very interesting pieces.
How much do you think it will fetch, the Rainbow?
So the Rainbow has an estimate of above 3 million Swiss francs. So that's about $3,300,000. I'm a very superstitious man. So I would say it will make at least 3 million francs.
I thought you would answer that.
No. I'm superstitious. But then again, it's impossible, to be honest, to put a price on something which is unique. What would you think it would be worth?
I think we did a post. Now when you said before the podcast, I remember we did a post specifically for the watch, and we asked, and this is what we like. A lot of people said between 5 and 7. That's what I remember the number in my head, Swiss francs, so 5 million to 7 million, and maybe more, because
it's always difficult to put a price on something which is unique. I have no idea. It is the most important. Rolex never made unique pieces.
Mm-hmm.
This is a unique piece. Rolex in 1994 was making sports watches, mostly Daytonas, GMTs, subs. Today, Rolex makes rainbows and diamond set and emerald set. They weren't doing it at the time. There's a lot of newness there.
But let me ask you then, that will be the second to last. That's what I always do in every podcast. So how do you end up with these watches?
I think it's well, first of all, I think we have a lot of collectors who trust us, and they know that, if they want to sell something, they will come to us because they know they will take good care of them, both in terms of them, the marketing we do around the watches, the way we present the watches, photography, the traveling exhibitions, the videos. You'll see we're doing a super cool short film on this Rainbow. It should come out in October, so in a couple of in 10 days or so. I mean, we have a dedicated digital video photography team to do that. So I think they know that we would take good care of them, and it's always it's a virtuous circle. You have good watches, you get good clients, you get good results, you get good results, you get good watches, etc., etc., etc. But I mean, it's a lot of hard work. At the beginning of our talk, I said I've never worked this hard in my life, and I used to be a lawyer working 24 hours a day, but I don't consider it work because I'm having fun. But it's a lot of work.
And then, so this is the unique first time to market. First owner, or you don't want to disclose this? I mean, the original owner. I mean,
No.
no.
But there's have been very few owners.
Interesting.
There have been very few owners.
Last question.
Let's go.
A lot of people think, funny thing, how big is our digital online auctions in Kuwait, right? Have you heard about our Instagram lives?
Yes.
It's crazy. Like every single week they close like $1 million. It's fine. On a single live, which is on Instagram, with a crappy video, no catalog, nothing.
No, I know because I have a lot of clients who taking screenshots saying, should I buy this?
Okay. So the thing is, and it's very funny. It's very different to what you guys do. So you guys have at least a month or two minimum. Here it's a weekly thing. So we see prices on a weekly basis. We see watches being sold and exchanged on a weekly basis, and it's really easy for us. You pay. I don't know if you know how it works. You send to the owner of the auction. You tell them I want to bet tomorrow. They will send you a link for $3,000. Depends on how much you want to spend, I think. But let's say if you want to buy something more than 1,000 KD, $3,000, they send you a link, and you start betting, and then you would just get it by the next 4 or 5 days. You settle the amount and you get the watch. So it's very easy. There's no passport. There's nothing. But from what I know, also betting on a huge auction house like yourself is easy. So can you just explain the process of, let's say, Ali wanna bet on a watch for your upcoming auction? So
buying from auction is actually fun and very easy. And sometimes people think it's a bit overwhelming, but it's not. It's super easy. We don't even ask you to send us money beforehand. So all you need to do is, if you like a watch, you contact somebody from the Phillips department. You have all the names, all the contacts in the catalogs. You need to send a copy of your ID and a proof of address. That's requested by law. Proof of address can be your phone bill or whatever. We sign you up, create an account, and then you can either bid online, come to the show, to the auction, which is great fun. Have somebody telephone you and say, yeah, you can phone with them, you can bid with them, or you can just send a written bid saying, this is the maximum bid I want to put. You can get it, you cannot get it. So it's very easy. It's very easy.
Because people think it's a big auction house, they would require papers and such.
No, that's 2 papers. That's it. Unless you want to bid on the rainbow and we don't know you, then you would have to give some kind of bank details, etc. And and our watches travel on exhibition. We go to Dubai. We go to London. We go to New York. We go to Singapore. We go to Hong Kong. We go to Geneva. So at any point of time, the watches are never very far from you. And sometimes it's worth coming to see, even if you don't have the money to buy the watches. It's just to see how many times in your life are you going to see the first watch made by Jean. How many times in your life are you going to see a unique Dufour? How many times are you going to see the first rainbow ever made? These are watches which, once they go to a collection, they're not going to come back for the next 20 years. So please do come.
We'll do. Promise, inshallah. Alex, thanks a lot for your time.
Ali, thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Hopefully you enjoyed.
I could continue talking for another hour or two.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. We're going to take you in Kuwait a little bit. I really hope that's your first but not last. So you have to promise us at least twice a visit.
I'm
or
definitely
at least once.
You're going to be seeing a lot of me. You're going to get sick of it.
I'm very happy to have you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ali. It was a pleasure.